Nobody had ever slapped Alpha King Varric Stormfang. Not generals, not nobles, not enemies, not even foreign rulers who secretly hated him. For 12 years, he had ruled the Darkfang Kingdom through sheer force of will. Entire packs surrendered, rather than challenge him. Rebellions ended before they began. Assassins rarely survived long enough to regret their decisions. Fear followed his name across the continent. Respect usually followed shortly afterward, which was why the sight, before 30 armed warriors, felt impossible. A woman had just struck him, hard. The crack echoed through the forest clearing. Every wolf froze. Several guards instinctively reached for their weapons. One young soldier actually stumbled backward. Because nobody knew what happened next. There was no protocol for this. No royal handbook chapter titled, "What to Do When Someone Slaps the Alpha King." The woman stood directly in front of him, breathing heavily, hands clenched into fists. Her dark hair had partially escaped its braid during the journey. Dust covered her dress. Anger blazed in her eyes, and somehow she looked completely prepared to do it again. "That's for kidnapping me." The words shattered the silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The forest itself seemed to pause, waiting, watching. The Alpha King slowly turned his head back toward her. His jaw tightened. The red mark on his cheek remained visible. His warriors exchanged nervous glances. Several began calculating how quickly they could dispose of a body. Because surely this ended one way. Nobody struck Varric Stormfang and remained alive. The Alpha King's expression revealed nothing, which was almost worse. Then something impossible happened. A sound echoed inside his head, soft, content, almost affectionate. Varric nearly choked. His wolf was purring. For one horrifying moment, he wondered whether he had suffered a concussion. Perhaps the slap had damaged something important. That seemed more reasonable than the alternative. The purring continued. Interesting. Varric mentally growled. His wolf ignored him. Very interesting. The Alpha King stared at the furious woman. She stared right back, not intimidated, not frightened, not even slightly concerned for her survival, which honestly should have worried her a great deal. "You kidnapped me." The woman pointed directly at him, as though speaking to an irresponsible child. "You tied my hands." Another point. "You threw me over a horse." The warriors collectively decided the ground looked fascinating. No one wanted to be involved anymore. "You dragged me halfway across the kingdom." The woman folded her arms. "And now you're standing there, acting confused." Varric remained silent, mostly because she wasn't wrong. The situation had become increasingly confusing, particularly since meeting her. One of his commanders finally cleared his throat, carefully, very carefully. "Your Majesty." The warning arrived too late. The woman whipped around. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again. "You are the Alpha King?" Several warriors took a step backward. This was somehow getting worse. The woman looked back at Varric, then at the soldiers, then back at Varric again. For one hopeful second, the Alpha King thought realization might finally arrive. Perhaps fear, perhaps caution, possibly common sense. Instead, she groaned, actually groaned. "Oh, that's just perfect." The response stunned everyone, even Varric. The woman pressed both hands against her face. "I slapped a king." Nobody corrected her, because technically speaking, yes, she had, very successfully. Then she lowered her hands, pointed directly at him again, and asked the question nobody wanted answered. Why exactly did you kidnap me? Silence followed. Long, uncomfortable, dangerous, because suddenly every warrior remembered something important. The woman wasn't supposed to be here. The mission had targeted someone else. Someone important. Someone dangerous. Not a village teacher from Hollowbrook. Not a healer. Not this woman. Varric's expression darkened immediately, because for the first time since her arrival, he realized exactly how complicated this situation had become. And unfortunately, his wolf chose that exact moment to speak again. Mate. The Alpha King's stomach dropped. Absolutely not. Mate. His wolf sounded delighted. Varric suddenly understood two things at once. First, his warriors had kidnapped the wrong woman. Second, his wolf had absolutely no intention of giving her back. 3 days earlier, everything had seemed simple. That should have been Varric's first warning. In his experience, simple plans rarely stayed simple for long, especially when politics became involved. The trouble began during a midnight council meeting. Rain hammered against the palace windows. Storm clouds gathered above the Darkfang capital. Inside the war chamber, tension filled the air. Spies, generals, advisors, everyone wore the same expression. Concern, which immediately captured Varric's attention. His chief intelligence officer stood beside a map spread across the council table. Several documents lay open nearby. Intercepted letters, witness reports, surveillance records. Months of investigation condensed into a single conclusion. Someone was planning to assassinate the Alpha King. Again. Unfortunately, that part wasn't surprising. Assassination attempts were practically a seasonal tradition. What concerned the council was the scale. This wasn't the work of a lone fanatic, or a disgruntled noble, or an ambitious rival. An entire network appeared involved. A well-funded one, a patient one, and according to the evidence, they intended to strike during the upcoming peace summit, the largest diplomatic gathering of the year. Representatives from 6 kingdoms would attend. Thousands of guests would fill the capital. Security would be stretched thin. The perfect opportunity. Varric studied the reports quietly. His expression remained calm. The room's atmosphere did not. Several advisors already looked exhausted. Others appeared terrified. One diplomat seemed moments away from fainting. The Alpha King remained unimpressed. Who is coordinating it? The question cut through the room immediately. His intelligence officer pointed toward a document. We don't know the leader. Varric frowned. The answer displeased him. The officer quickly continued. But we found someone connected to the organization. Now they were getting somewhere. A map marker was placed near the eastern border. Lady Seraphina Veilcross. Several council members nodded. The name carried weight. A noblewoman from a neighboring territory. Well-connected, well-traveled, politically influential, and, according to intelligence reports, in possession of information capable of exposing the entire conspiracy. Varric considered the situation briefly, then reached the obvious conclusion. Bring her here. The order sounded simple, because it was. Capture the witness, question her, uncover the network, prevent the assassination. Problem solved. Or at least that was the theory. His commander selected a team immediately. Experienced trackers, reliable soldiers, men who had completed dozens of successful operations. The assignment should have lasted 2 days, 3 at most. Instead, it became one of the most embarrassing mistakes in Darkfang history. The target had been traveling through a remote border region. Several villages dotted the surrounding countryside. One scout identified a woman matching the description. Dark hair, correct age, traveling alone. The opportunity appeared perfect. The warriors moved quickly, efficiently, professionally, and completely, incorrectly. By the time anyone questioned the identification, the woman was already unconscious inside a transport wagon. Halfway to the capital, the mistake revealed itself the following evening. Varek still remembered the exact moment. A second intelligence report arrived, one carrying deeply unfortunate news. The real Lady Seraphina Valcross had just attended a public banquet in another territory, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, very much not kidnapped. The war chamber became painfully quiet. Varek stared at the report, then at his commander, then back at the report. The commander wisely remained silent. Several advisors looked ready to flee the kingdom, because there was only one possible explanation. They had taken the wrong woman. A search of local records followed immediately. The results somehow made everything worse. Mira Hollowbrook, age 26, village school teacher, part-time healer. No criminal record, no political affiliations, no connection to the conspiracy whatsoever. Her greatest documented offense involved arguing with a tax collector 2 years earlier. And, according to witness statements, she had been correct. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then, Varek pinched the bridge of his nose, slowly, painfully, because even by Darkfang standards, this was spectacular incompetence. The obvious solution should have been release, apologize, provide compensation, return her home. Simple, reasonable, appropriate. Unfortunately, fate had other plans, because before Varek could issue those orders, his wolf finally saw Mira, and everything changed. The memory made him grimace now, standing in the forest, clearing 3 days later, watching the furious woman who had just slapped him, listening to his wolf purr like an idiot. Varek realized releasing her might no longer be the simple solution, especially when the beast inside him repeated the same word again. Mate. The Alpha King's headache immediately returned. The problem wasn't Mira. The problem was his wolf. Varek discovered this within 48 hours. Unfortunately, the beast seemed determined to prove it every minute. The moment Mira entered the breakfast hall, mate, Varek nearly dropped his coffee. The wolf sounded absurdly pleased, which was irritating, because Mira looked anything but pleased. She marched into the room wearing the expression of someone preparing to start an argument, an expression he was becoming alarmingly familiar with. The guards posted near the doors immediately straightened. Several servants wisely retreated. Experience had taught them an important lesson. Whenever Mira Hollowbrook entered a room occupied by the Alpha King, peace usually left. Right alongside common sense, she stopped directly across from him, folded her arms, and glared. "You have terrible security." Varek blinked. That wasn't how most conversations began. "Good morning to you, too. It took me 12 minutes to leave my room." Mira pointed toward the hallway. 8 guards followed me. A pause. One tripped over a table. The Alpha King closed his eyes briefly. His wolf found this hilarious. Mate is observant. Varek ignored him. Mostly because the beast was correct. Mira dropped into the chair opposite him, entirely uninvited. No one commented, because no one possessed a death wish. The servants hurriedly placed breakfast in front of her. Mira thanked them immediately. Every single one. By name. The detail caught Varek's attention. Most nobles barely acknowledged servants. Mira somehow remembered all 12. The wolf purred again. "Good mate. Stop." The word escaped before Varek could stop it. Mira frowned. "I wasn't speaking." His headache intensified. "Not you." Now she looked concerned. "Should I call a healer?" Several servants suddenly found reasons to leave the room. Immediately. Varek decided silence was the safest option. The wolf disagreed. You like her? Absolutely not. You do. The Alpha King stabbed a piece of bread with considerably more force than necessary. Across the table, Mira watched him suspiciously. The situation deteriorated steadily from there. Every day produced another confrontation. Sometimes multiple. By the end of the week, the palace staff had started placing bets. Unofficially, of course. Officially, no one would ever admit such a thing. The most memorable argument happened inside the royal archives. Varric arrived expecting peace. Instead, he found Mira reorganizing records. His records. The kingdom's records. Without permission. Librarians stood nearby, looking terrified. Mira, she glanced up. Oh, good. The words never meant anything positive. Your tax system is ridiculous. Varric stared. For several seconds, because of all the complaints he expected. That one wasn't particularly high on the list. Mira continued sorting documents. The northern villages pay nearly twice as much transportation tax as central districts. She held up a ledger, which makes no sense. Another ledger appeared. Your grain tariffs are outdated. A third followed. And whoever designed this filing system should be arrested. The librarians looked personally attacked. Varric looked confused. The wolf looked delighted. Mate fixes things. She is reorganizing government records. Efficient mate. She broke into the archives. Resourceful mate. Varric hated when the wolf made good points. The situation became even worse when Mira started interacting with palace staff. Within days, injured servants sought her advice. Kitchen workers adored her. Stable hands respected her. Even the guards began smiling whenever she appeared. One veteran warrior described her as refreshingly terrifying. No one disagreed. The transformation happened gradually. Then, all at once, suddenly, Mira wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't even an inconvenience. She was simply part of the palace, as though she had always belonged there. The realization unsettled Varric more than he cared to admit. One evening, he found her sitting alone in the western courtyard, reading. The setting sun painted the gardens gold. For once, she wasn't arguing, wasn't criticizing, wasn't threatening to improve government systems. She looked peaceful. The sight stopped him unexpectedly. Mira glanced up, noticing him immediately. What? The question sounded suspicious. Varric almost laughed. Almost. Nothing. She narrowed her eyes. You were staring. I was thinking. That's somehow worse. The response arrived so quickly that Varric actually laughed. A real laugh. Short, unexpected, genuine. Both of them froze. Because the sound was rare, very rare. Mira stared. The wolf practically vibrated with satisfaction. Mate made us laugh. Varric looked away toward the darkening sky. Because suddenly, he realized something deeply inconvenient. He no longer dreaded seeing Mira. In fact, he was starting to look forward to it. And that was far more dangerous than any slap. By the second week, Mira had accidentally become a problem. Not a political problem. Not a security problem. A personal one. At least for Varric. Because despite being kidnapped, transported across the kingdom, and effectively trapped inside a royal palace, Mira refused to behave like someone intimidated. The phenomenon fascinated everyone, especially the guards. One morning, Captain Roran arrived at training grounds with a dislocated shoulder. The injury happened during sparring. Normally, he would have ignored it. Most warriors did. Instead, Mira grabbed his arm, twisted, pulled, and forced the joint back into place before he could protest. The captain screamed loud enough to alarm nearby horses, then stared at his restored shoulder. Astonished, Mira simply nodded. Try not to do that again. The captain obeyed immediately, a development Varric found deeply suspicious. Within days, similar incidents appeared everywhere. A cook with a burn injury, a stable worker with infected cuts, a servant suffering recurring fevers. Mira treated them all, never asking permission, never requesting payment, never expecting gratitude. She simply helped. The palace staff quickly became devoted to her. The transformation happened so naturally that no one noticed until it was complete. One afternoon, Varric walked into the kitchens. Every servant stopped what they were doing, not because of him, because Mira was leaving. And apparently, half the kitchen wanted to give her food. The Alpha King watched in disbelief. A baker handed her pastries. A cook offered fresh bread. Someone else insisted she take fruit. The woman looked like she was being ambushed by affection. It was ridiculous and strangely endearing. The wolf loved it. Everyone likes mate. Apparently. You like mate too. Varric ignored him. The wolf interpreted silence as agreement. Unfortunately, the problem deepened whenever Mira interacted with ordinary people, because she treated everyone exactly the same. Servants, guards, nobles, advisors, even kings, particularly kings. That afternoon, she marched directly into a council meeting. Without invitation, without warning, without fear. The council members looked horrified. Several nearly swallowed their own tongues, because no one simply walked into the Alpha King's council chamber. Mira did. Then she placed a stack of papers directly in front of Varric. What is this? The question escaped before he could stop it. Your hospital records. That sounded concerning. Mira folded her arms. The mortality rate is unacceptable. Silence. The council stared. Varric stared. One advisor looked ready to faint. Mira continued. You need more trained healers. A second paper appeared. Better sanitation. Another. And someone should really explain hand-washing to your military. The chamber remained completely silent, because unfortunately, she wasn't wrong. The worst part was that she had evidence. Charts, reports, statistical comparisons. The woman had somehow conducted a full medical audit while technically still being a prisoner. The council eventually approved every recommendation, mostly because arguing proved impossible. Later that evening, Varric found himself walking beside her through the palace gardens. For once, neither argued. The silence felt comfortable. Unexpectedly, Mira glanced toward him. You've been staring again. There it is. What? The accusation. She rolled her eyes. You do stare. Varric considered denying it, then remembered she would immediately know he was lying. An annoying talent. The gardens grew quieter around them. Night settled gently across the palace grounds. For a while, neither spoke. Then, Mira surprised him. Can I ask something? Varric nodded. You could have released me. The observation landed softly, yet somehow carried weight, because she was right. The mistake had been discovered days ago. Her innocence established immediately. No legal reason existed for keeping her here. No political reason either. Only one. The wolf. Varric kept that detail to himself, for obvious reasons. Instead, he answered honestly. I wanted to understand why my enemies were interested in you. Mira accepted the explanation. Mostly, but not entirely. He could see the skepticism, the questions, the uncertainty, and for the first time since meeting her, Varric realized something important. Mira trusted very few people, yet somehow, she was beginning to trust him. The realization should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt dangerous, Because every day she remained inside the palace, the bond between them grew stronger, whether either of them wanted it or not, and neither realized that fate was already moving toward them, because elsewhere in the kingdom, someone had just recognized the mark hidden on Mira's shoulder, and that discovery was about to change everything. The discovery happened by accident. Most life-changing revelations did. A spilled tray, a torn sleeve, one brief glimpse of skin, and suddenly, an entire kingdom's history changed direction. It happened inside the royal infirmary. Mira had spent most of the morning helping overwhelmed healers organize medical supplies. Apparently, kidnapping victims became volunteer administrators now. The irony wasn't lost on her. One young apprentice rushed around a corner carrying herbs. Too quickly. The collision was unavoidable. Glass shattered. Supplies scattered. And Mira instinctively reached forward to catch the apprentice before she fell. The movement pulled her sleeve downward. Just enough. The room barely noticed. Everyone except one person. An elderly historian standing near the archives desk froze completely. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. And for several seconds, he simply stared at Mira's shoulder. Specifically, the unusual silver birthmark near her collarbone. Mira followed his gaze, then frowned. What? The old man looked as though he had seen a ghost, or perhaps several. That's impossible. The words escaped as a whisper. The apprentice blinked. Mira blinked. Nobody understood. The historian pointed with a trembling hand. The mark. Silence. What about it? His expression somehow became even stranger. Because apparently impossible wasn't strong enough. 3 hours later, Varric found himself sitting inside the royal archives. Again, across from him sat the historian, surrounded by ancient books, maps, scrolls, documents so old they practically crumbled when touched. The old man looked exhausted and deeply alarmed. Neither condition inspired confidence. Varric folded his arms. Explain. The historian swallowed, then carefully opened a weathered manuscript. Your Majesty, have you ever heard of the Moonvale bloodline? The name meant nothing, which immediately made it dangerous. Because Varric prided himself on knowing his kingdom's history, the historian nodded slowly, as though expecting the reaction. Most people haven't. Several books were opened, pages turned, ancient records revealed. The deeper the explanation continued, the worse it became. Centuries earlier, before the kingdom existed, a powerful bloodline helped establish the magical protections surrounding the territory. The Moonvale line, a family gifted with unusual connections to ancient wolf magic. Guardians, protectors, keepers of old bonds. Their descendants maintained those protections for generations until the bloodline disappeared, or so history believed. The final known members vanished nearly 300 years ago. The line was declared extinct. Case closed. End of story. Unfortunately, the birthmark changed everything. The historian pointed toward an illustration, a silver crescent-shaped symbol, identical to Mira's. The room became very quiet. Varric stared at the image, then at Mira, then back again. Neither version changed. The resemblance was exact. No, Mira shook her head immediately. The denial arrived instinctively. This is ridiculous. Varric couldn't entirely blame her. It did sound ridiculous. The historian looked sympathetic and completely unconvinced. Ancient records mention the mark repeatedly. He opened another book, then another, then another. Every source described the same symbol, the same lineage, the same bloodline. The evidence accumulated rapidly, painfully, relentlessly. By sunset, denial became increasingly difficult. Mira sat quietly beside a window, trying to process everything. Schoolteacher, healer, kidnapping victim, apparently descendant of a legendary bloodline. The transition felt abrupt. Varric understood the feeling. He experienced something similar every time politics happened. The historian cleared his throat. There is another problem. Those 4 words never improved situations. Ever. Varric immediately frowned. The old man looked uncomfortable. Sucky, several neighboring territories have been searching for surviving Moonveil descendants. Silence. The implications settled quickly. And badly. Mira looked up. Why? The answer arrived far too fast. Because the bloodline controls access to certain ancient protections. The room chilled. Not physically, emotionally, politically, dangerously. Varric's expression hardened immediately. Because suddenly, several recent intelligence reports made sense. Missing persons, ancient artifact thefts, unusual movements near old ruins. Someone had been searching, methodically, patiently, for years, and somehow they missed Mira, until now. The realization sent a sharp warning through his instincts. His wolf reacted immediately. Protect, mate. For once, Varric agreed, because this was no longer about a mistaken kidnapping, or an awkward bond, or palace politics. Someone out there had been hunting the Moonveil bloodline. And if they learned Mira survived, they would come. The first palace alarm sounded just after midnight. The first alarm bell rang at 12:17. The second followed 6 seconds later. By the third, the entire palace knew something was wrong. Varric was already awake. Years of assassination attempts had permanently altered his sleeping habits. The moment the first bell sounded, he was out of bed. The second bell had him reaching for a sword. The third confirmed his suspicions. Someone had breached the palace. The door to his chambers burst open. Captain Roran entered immediately. Blood stained his uniform. Not his own. Multiple intruders. Varric was already moving. How many? We don't know. A terrible answer. The captain's expression made it worse. They're heading toward the eastern wing. The Alpha King stopped. Just for a second. The eastern wing. Mira's wing. His wolf erupted instantly. Mate? The word slammed through his mind. Not calm. Not pleased. Panicked. Dangerously panicked. Varric was running before Roran finished speaking. The palace corridors blurred around him. Guards rushed past. Steel clashed somewhere below. Shouts echoed through the darkness. The attack had been planned carefully. Too carefully. Several security checkpoints were already compromised. 2 guards lay unconscious near the eastern staircase. Another was injured. A 4th was dead. The sight darkened Varric's expression immediately. This wasn't an assassination attempt. Not anymore. This was a retrieval mission. And suddenly he understood. The attackers didn't come for him. They came for Mira. The realization made something cold settle inside his chest. Ahead, another explosion echoed through the corridor. A palace window shattered. Glass rained across marble floors. The attackers were getting closer. Too close. Roran signaled toward a side passage. 3 entered from there. Varric changed direction instantly. His wolf had stopped speaking, stopped purring, stopped making unhelpful observations. Now it was completely silent, which somehow felt worse. Then he smelled blood. The scent hit him like a physical blow. Fresh, sharp, unmistakable. His entire body went rigid. The scent belonged to Mira. For one terrible moment, everything stopped. Thought, reason, control, all of it. Then his wolf roared. Not a growl, not a warning. A roar. Ancient. Primal. Terrifying. Mine. The palace walls seemed to shake. Varric barely remembered reaching her chambers. One moment, he was running. The next, he was kicking the door open hard enough to splinter the frame. The scene inside froze him. For half a second, Mira stood near the window, a dagger clutched in one hand. 2 unconscious assassins lay on the floor. A third leaned against the wall, very dead, which was impressive and slightly concerning. Unfortunately, a fourth attacker still remained. The assassin held a blade, and blood stained Mira's sleeve. Red, bright, fresh. The sight destroyed whatever control remained. The world narrowed instantly. Nothing existed except the wound, the threat, the danger. The wolf surged forward. For the first time in years, Varric stopped fighting it. The transformation wasn't complete. Didn't need to be. The assassin barely had time to react. 1 second he stood. The next, he was flying across the room. A wall stopped him. Violently. The fight ended almost immediately afterward. It wasn't much of a fight, more of a lesson, a very short lesson. By the time palace guards arrived, the room was silent. The assassin wasn't moving. Neither were the others. Varric didn't care. His attention remained fixed elsewhere. Mira. She blinked, apparently surprised. Hello. The greeting felt absurd, especially under the circumstances. Blood continued soaking through her sleeve. Varric crossed the room instantly. You're hurt. It's a scratch. It isn't. It really is. The argument might have continued. Normally, it would have. Instead, Mira suddenly swayed. Only slightly, but enough. Varric caught her before she fell. The contact silenced the room, including Mira, including the guards, because for the first time since meeting her, the Alpha King looked genuinely afraid. Not angry, not dangerous, afraid. The realization unsettled everyone, especially Mira. He looked down at the blood staining her sleeve, then toward the bodies scattered across the room. Something changed in his expression. Something cold, final, deadly. The wolf settled beside that feeling, perfectly calm now, because the threat was gone, for the moment. Varric handed Mira carefully to approaching healers, then turned toward Captain Roran. His voice carried no emotion, which made it far worse. Find everyone involved. The captain swallowed. Your Majesty. Everyone. Silence. The room understood. The palace understood. Soon, the entire kingdom would understand. This wasn't retaliation anymore. This wasn't justice. This was war. And by sunrise, every person connected to the conspiracy would learn a terrifying truth. The ruthless Alpha King wasn't protecting a political asset. He was protecting his mate, and the kingdom had just witnessed how dangerous that made him. The kingdom changed after the attack. Not dramatically, not immediately, but in hundreds of small ways. Guards doubled throughout the palace. Security checkpoints appeared overnight. Patrols increased. Visitors underwent inspections. Every entrance became heavily monitored. Officially, the measures protected the royal family. Unofficially, everyone knew they protected Mira. The realization spread surprisingly quickly. Palace servants noticed first, then advisors, then nobles. Eventually, the rumors escaped the capital entirely. The ruthless Alpha King had found his mate, and apparently, he was handling the discovery with all the subtlety of a battlefield siege. Mira found the situation deeply irritating. 3 days after the attack, she attempted to leave the infirmary. 6 guards followed. The next day, she visited the palace gardens. 8 guards followed. On the 3rd day, she tried sneaking into the archives through a side corridor. 10 guards followed. The effort felt excessive. Varric disagreed, strongly. You were attacked by professional assassins. Mira folded her arms. They failed. That isn't the point. It feels like the point. The argument occurred inside his office, which had become another recurring problem. For reasons neither fully understood, they kept ending up in the same rooms, having the same conversations, repeating the same disagreements. The wolf enjoyed every second. Mate is healthy. She is impossible. Healthy, impossible, mate. Varric hated when the beast sounded pleased. Across the desk, Mira narrowed her eyes. You did it again. What? The staring. He sighed. She was annoyingly observant. The injury on her arm had mostly healed, a fact he appreciated more than he intended. The sight of blood that night still haunted him. More than it should. Far more than it should. The memory remained vivid. Too vivid. And every time it surfaced, the wolf reacted. Protect, mate. The instinct had become relentless. Dangerously relentless. Mira seemed unaware of how close things had come. Or perhaps she understood and simply refused to dwell on it. Either option sounded like her. The days that followed brought additional revelations. Not all of them pleasant. The conspiracy stretched much further than expected. Captured documents exposed hidden cells operating across multiple territories. Several noble families were implicated. Ancient artifacts connected to the Moonvale bloodline were recovered, and every discovery confirmed the same thing. Mira had been the true target all along. Not Varric, not the throne. Her. The realization unsettled her more than she admitted. One evening, he found her standing on a palace balcony overlooking the city. The capital glowed beneath the setting sun. Thousands of lights flickered below. The view usually calmed him. Tonight, it did nothing. Mira leaned against the stone railing, quiet, thoughtful. For once, the sight immediately caught his attention. You're thinking. She glanced sideways. You make that sound suspicious. It usually is. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared. The silence returned, different this time, heavier. Eventually, Mira spoke. Why me? The question carried more weight than the words suggested. Varric understood immediately. The bloodline? She nodded. The attacks? Another nod. The fact that my entire life apparently belongs to some ancient story nobody bothered telling me. The frustration sounded genuine and justified. For years, she believed she was ordinary, a healer, a teacher, a village woman. Then suddenly, history reached forward and rewrote everything. The adjustment couldn't be easy. Varric looked toward the city, searching for the right answer. Finding none. Finally, he settled for honesty. I don't know. Mira blinked. The admission surprised her. Most rulers pretended certainty. Varric rarely bothered. You don't know. No. He folded his arms. I know someone hid the truth. A pause. I know powerful people wanted your bloodline. Another. And I know they were willing to kill for it. The city lights flickered below. The evening air remained cool, quiet, peaceful. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mira looked at him. Really looked at him. Not as a king, not as a captor, not even as the infuriating man who refused to release her. As Varric, the man who arrived first when she was attacked. The man who sat outside the infirmary all night afterward. The man who never admitted either fact. Something softened in her expression. Only slightly, yet enough. Enough for him to notice. Enough for the wolf to practically preen. Mate trusts us. Varric remained silent, because the beast might actually be right. And somehow, that possibility felt far more dangerous than any assassin. The question arrived 3 weeks later, which, in Varric's opinion, was 3 weeks longer than expected. Mira had been patient, suspiciously patient. That alone should have warned him. They were walking through the palace gardens when she finally asked it. No arguments, no accusations, no dramatic confrontation, just one simple question. Why am I still here? Varric stopped. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Flowers swayed beside the stone pathways. Somewhere in the distance, palace guards changed shifts. The world continued normally. Unfortunately, the question wasn't normal, because it required an answer, a real one. Mira watched him carefully. She already knew part of the truth. The conspiracy, the bloodline, the danger, all of that was real. Yet it wasn't the complete explanation. Not anymore. She folded her arms, waiting, patiently, which somehow made everything worse. Varric looked away first, toward the gardens, toward anything except her, because despite being one of the most feared rulers on the continent, there were still certain conversations he disliked. This was one of them. Finally, he exhaled. You could have left weeks ago. Mira blinked. The admission surprised her. Perhaps because it was honest, perhaps because she already suspected it. Either way, silence followed. Then she asked the obvious question. Then why didn't you let me? There it was. The real issue. The one both of them had been avoiding. For weeks, maybe longer. The wolf stirred immediately. Interested. Alert. Far too pleased. Tell mate. Varric ignored him. The wolf repeated itself. Tell mate. You're becoming irritating. Mira frowned. Again, I wasn't speaking. The response almost made him smile. Almost. Instead, he focused on the problem. The truth. Because there was no point avoiding it anymore. Not after everything that happened. Not after the attack. Not after the countless conversations. The late nights. The growing trust. The bond neither of them fully understood. Or perhaps understood too well. Slowly, Varric looked at her. The first reason was the conspiracy. Mira nodded. Reasonable. Expected. The second reason was your bloodline. Again, reasonable. Again, expected. Then came the difficult part. His gaze held hers. Steady. Certain. The third reason was you. Silence. Complete silence. The garden seemed to disappear. The distant sounds faded. Even the wind felt quieter. Mira stared. Not because she didn't understand, because she did. Perfectly. And that understanding changed everything. Varric continued before she could interrupt. You challenged me. A faint smile appeared. You argued with me. The smile grew slightly. You insulted my government. It needed improvement. That's not the point. It absolutely is. The familiar exchange eased some of the tension. Not all. Just enough. Varric shook his head, then laughed softly. A real laugh. The kind she heard more often recently. The kind she secretly liked. You treated me like a person. The words settled gently between them, yet carried unexpected weight. Because suddenly, Mira understood. Kings rarely met honesty. Rulers rarely met equals. Most people feared power. Others worshipped it. Very few ignored it. Mira had done exactly that. From the first slap onward. The memory made her smile, despite herself. Varric noticed immediately. Of course he did. The wolf certainly did. Mate smiling. Quiet. Still not speaking. He groaned. Mira laughed. The sound echoed through the gardens. Warm. Genuine. Dangerous. Because it made something inside him settle. Comfortably. Naturally. Like it belonged there. For a while they simply walked. Neither rushing the conversation. Neither trying to define what already existed. Eventually, Mira glanced toward him. Her expression softer now. Thoughtful. You're saying I stayed because you wanted me to. Varric considered the statement, then nodded. Yes. The honesty stunned her. Not because of the answer, because he refused to hide from it, refused to soften it, refused to pretend otherwise. The Alpha King could have offered politics, duty, responsibility, a dozen convenient excuses. Instead, he chose truth. The realization warmed something inside her, and that was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all, because for the first time since arriving at the palace, Mira wasn't thinking about leaving. She was thinking about staying. The kingdom recovered slowly. Conspiracies rarely disappeared overnight. Even after the arrests, even after the trials, even after the final remnants of the organization were dismantled, there was always paperwork, always politics, always someone attempting to profit from chaos. Fortunately, Varric possessed considerable experience dealing with all three. Unfortunately, so did Mira, which meant she became involved, whether either of them intended it or not. Months passed. The Moonvale bloodline was officially restored to the kingdom's records. Ancient archives reopened. Forgotten protections strengthened. Several magical sites previously believed dormant began responding once more. The historians became insufferably excited. The scholars somehow became worse. Mira endured both groups with remarkable patience. Most days. Other days, she threatened to throw books at them. The threats proved surprisingly effective. Life settled into a new rhythm. Not ordinary. Neither of them seemed capable of ordinary, but stable, comfortable, real. And for the first time in many years, the Darkfang Kingdom experienced genuine peace, which was how they eventually found themselves standing together on the Western Palace balcony, watching the sunset. The city stretched below them. Golden light reflected from rooftops. The distant mountains glowed beneath the fading sky. Everything felt strangely quiet, a rare gift. Mira leaned against the railing, relaxed, content, a sight Varric still found distracting. The wolf certainly did. Mate, happy. For once, Varric didn't tell him to be quiet. Because the beast was right. Mira looked happy, and somehow that mattered. More than it should. The realization no longer frightened him, which was probably another problem. After a while, Mira spoke. If your warriors hadn't made that mistake. Varric glanced toward her. The question carried a familiar weight, the kind people asked when they already suspected the answer, yet needed to hear it anyway. Silence stretched briefly. Then he looked back toward the horizon. They wouldn't have found you. The truth settled between them. Simple, honest, absolute. No kidnapping, no mistaken identity, no arguments, no slap, no bond, no them. Fate would have continued moving along separate paths, never intersecting. The thought felt strange, uncomfortable. Mira considered it for a moment, then another. Finally, she sighed, dramatically. Good thing they're incompetent. The statement hit him unexpectedly. A laugh escaped before he could stop it. Real, warm, completely unrestrained. Mira immediately looked pleased with herself, which only made him laugh harder. The sound surprised both of them, because once upon a time, the ruthless Alpha King rarely laughed. Now, it seemed to happen far more often, almost exclusively around her. The wolf practically glowed with satisfaction. Mate funny. Don't encourage her. Too late. Mira raised an eyebrow. You realize talking to yourself is still concerning. Talking to you is frequently concerning. Fair. The admission made him smile. The city lights began appearing below, one by one, bright points of gold against the approaching darkness. Beautiful, steady, alive, much like the kingdom itself. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. Not anymore. Eventually, Mira slipped her hand into his. The gesture felt natural, easy. as though it had always belonged there. Varric looked down briefly, then intertwined their fingers. The wolf went completely silent, not because it had nothing to say, because for the first time since finding her, it was content. Years later, people would tell the story incorrectly. They claimed the Alpha King kidnapped his mate. The tale spread across kingdoms, across generations, across history itself. It sounded romantic, dramatic, destined. The truth was much stranger. He kidnapped the wrong woman. His wolf simply refused to give her back. And somehow that mistake uncovered a conspiracy, restored an ancient bloodline, strengthened a kingdom, and gave the most feared Alpha King on the continent something he never expected to find. Not an ally, not a political advantage, not even a queen. A woman brave enough to slap him in front of 30 warriors, challenge him every day afterward, and stay long enough to steal his heart.